It started with an envelope. No name. No return address. Just a plain white envelope taped to my front door like a warning shot. Inside was a single sheet of paper with bold red letters. Pay $500 or your deck violation goes to the city inspector. Funny thing is, I don't even have a deck. That's when I knew something was deeply wrong in this neighborhood, and someone was going to regret trying to mess with me. My name's Tyler, and I just moved into this peaceful little HOA-controlled community outside Denver. The lawns were manicured, the mailboxes all identical, and the neighbors smiled like Stepford robots. I thought I'd landed a clean, quiet place to settle down. Turns out, I'd stepped into a den of snakes. And at the center of it all, Karen Caldwell, the HOA president from hell. Karen wasn't just strict. She was a tyrant in a pearl necklace. The kind of woman who'd measure your grass with a ruler or fine you for wind chimes being too melodic. I tried to stay under her radar, but when I refused to pay that bogus $500 demand, she made me her next target. It started with little things. A citation for a non-regulation trash bin. A fine for leaving my porch light on past 10 p.m. Then came the late-night knocks from mysterious security patrols asking invasive questions. My neighbors started avoiding me. Some whispered. One old man even slipped me a note. Don't fight her. Just pay. We all do. That's when I realized this wasn't a one-off. This was a system. A blackmail racket. Karen had been extorting homeowners using made-up violations, veiled threats, and forged citations. And the board? Useless. Most of them were her cronies, or too scared to push back. She'd been running this HOA like a personal fiefdom for years. But she made one fatal mistake. She came after me. See, I'm not your average homeowner. I'm a cybersecurity analyst. Ex-NSA. I don't just pay off threats. I dismantle them. I started documenting everything. Every fine, every visit, every weird violation notice. I installed hidden cameras around my property. I tracked every email from the HOA. And when I noticed my neighbor, sweet old Mrs. Rosenbaum, getting the same bogus fines, I paid her a visit. She broke down in tears. Karen had threatened to report her son's home business unless she paid monthly quiet fees. I couldn't believe it, so I recruited her. Then I talked to the single mom 3 doors down who'd gotten fined for a noise complaint while out of town. She joined me too. One by one, I built a quiet little alliance of fed-up residents. And then I baited Karen. I staged a fake violation, construction without HOA approval. I even left a permit visibly forged, hoping it would tempt her to make a move. Sure enough, 2 days later, I got a letter demanding $1,200 or code enforcement would be notified. She took the bait. What Karen didn't know was that I'd CC'd my cousin Jake, who works as an investigator for the Colorado Attorney General's office. The moment she sent that threat, she'd crossed the line into legal blackmail. Jake opened a case. But that wasn't enough. We needed proof she was doing this to others. So we launched Operation HOA Sting. I built a fake homeowner profile, a shell property I owned on paper, complete with a fake HOA history and minor violations. We baited Karen's cronies with small offenses, late dues, made-up problems. Within weeks, she sent a letter demanding $2,000 in back fees, or she'd file a lien. We got her voice on tape. We got bank transfers. We even got her on video delivering threats personally to one of my fake tenants. Jake handed everything to the DA. The day they arrested her was glorious. The entire neighborhood watched as squad cars pulled up in front of her pristine home. She tried to argue with the officers, screamed about revenge and how she was protecting the neighborhood. But they cuffed her right there in her driveway. One officer even smirked and said, "Looks like someone violated the wrong homeowner." After her arrest, the house of cards collapsed. The board resigned. The HOA entered emergency reorganization. My neighbors came out of hiding, finally sharing their horror stories. Fines were dropped, liens reversed. And guess who was voted interim HOA president? Yours truly. Now we run things differently. Transparent. Fair. No secret fines. No fake citations. Karen, she's facing charges for blackmail, fraud, and extortion. Turns out she was hiding nearly $370,000 in illegal HOA payments. I didn't sleep that night. Karen had crossed the line from annoying to dangerous. I spent the early morning reviewing the footage I'd caught on the Ring camera earlier. It wasn't just her threatening me. There were multiple instances of her visiting other neighbors, slipping papers into their mail slots, knocking late at night, even whispering through cracked doors. I knew she was doing it to more than just me. I printed still frames of her standing at various doorsteps. Some looked terrified, some just confused. But one neighbor in particular, Mrs. Vargas, had opened the door and handed Karen an envelope. That was it. That was the leverage. I needed to talk to her. I waited until 7 a.m., then headed across the street. Mrs. Vargas, a retired schoolteacher, answered the door with a startled expression. She didn't even let me speak. She said she had photos of my grandson, ones that could hurt his college admission, she said. I didn't know what else to do. I was stunned. Karen was blackmailing her with something that personal? It was beyond HOA drama now. This was criminal. I have a lawyer, I said, and I have evidence. If you're willing to help, I think we can stop her. Mrs. Vargas looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I'm tired of being afraid in my own neighborhood. I spent the next day knocking on doors. At least 4 other families admitted to being pressured by Karen in different ways. Everything from privacy violations to noise complaints tied to vague threats of public embarrassment. She was playing everyone, and no one had spoken up because they thought they were the only one. So I decided to go bigger. I organized a community safety meeting at the local rec center under the guise of talking about holiday crime and package theft. I handed out flyers and knocked on doors for 2 days. Karen didn't suspect a thing. The night of the meeting, the place was packed. Over 30 people showed up, including nearly every resident from the east side of the neighborhood, where Karen had been the most aggressive. I stood up front and laid it all out. The photos, the audio, the Ring footage, even anonymized statements from neighbors. People gasped. Some started crying. One woman stood up and said, "She made me pay $2,000 to not report my dog situation. I don't even have a dog." But it wasn't until Mr. Reynolds, our former HOA president who had mysteriously resigned, stood up and said, "She threatened to expose my medical history if I didn't step down," that the room turned ice cold. People realized it wasn't just them. It wasn't just petty complaints. Karen had manufactured leverage, personal, vicious, and used it to control this entire HOA like a dictator. The crowd erupted. Some people demanded we call the police right then. Others said they wanted her off the board immediately. But I had to slow it down. We need to do this right. We need undeniable proof. And we need the authorities involved. Otherwise, she'll wriggle out of it again. That's when I introduced someone new. This is Officer Preston. He's here off duty tonight, but he's already looking into the matter. Preston was a local officer I had contacted after showing him some early footage. He wasn't just curious, he was furious. "This is bigger than an HOA dispute," he told the group. "This looks like organized harassment, intimidation, and potentially blackmail. But we'll need formal statements, evidence, and we'll need to make sure she doesn't suspect anything until we're ready." Over the next week, everything moved fast. Neighbors began documenting everything. Copies of letters, phone recordings, screenshots of texts. Mrs. Vargas even found a torn-up photo that Karen had apparently threatened to use against her grandson, shoved behind a drawer. Meanwhile, Karen was strutting around the neighborhood like she owned it, completely unaware that a case was being built under her nose. One morning, she even waved at me smugly from her porch. "Nice try with your little community meeting. You think that's going to change anything?" she sneered. I just smiled and waved back. Let her feel in control. The fall would be even sweeter. But then something happened that almost blew the whole operation. Karen showed up at my house unannounced. She banged on the door like a lunatic, holding up a manila envelope and yelling, "You want to play games with me? I own this neighborhood." I hit record before I even opened the door. "You really think you can organize secret meetings and not get caught? I have friends on the HOA board. People talk. You're going to regret this." She shoved the envelope into my chest and stormed off. Inside were printed screenshots, personal posts from a private Facebook group I ran with some friends, and a couple photos of my wife's art studio. None of it was incriminating, but the implication was clear. She was threatening me next. That envelope was the final nail. When I handed it over to Officer Preston, he smiled like a man who just found the missing puzzle piece. "We're ready," he said. "You want to be there when we take her in?" "Yes," I said. "I want to watch her face when she realizes the entire neighborhood stood up to her." 2 days later, the trap was set. Officer Preston coordinated with the DA's office and a small task force to move in quietly. Their plan was to serve the warrant just after 6 p.m., when Karen was usually home, drinking boxed wine on her front porch and scrolling through her iPad, looking for her next target. I knew the routine too well. I'd been watching it for weeks. But this time, she wasn't alone. As I sat parked in my car across the street, watching from a distance, I saw a second figure step out from her house, one I hadn't expected. Darren Groves, the treasurer of the HOA board. He handed Karen a flash drive and a thick binder. She laughed and slapped him on the back like it was nothing. But that exchange changed everything. I quickly messaged Preston. "Groves is in it too." His reply came instantly. "Good catch. We'll adjust." 10 minutes later, 2 unmarked SUVs and a cruiser rolled silently to a stop at the curb in front of Karen's house. The officers approached calmly, but with intent. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw Karen freeze mid-sip, her wine glass trembling. One officer held up the warrant. Another stepped around and put cuffs on Groves first. Karen started screaming before anyone even touched her. "This is harassment. I am the law in this community." I don't know what they said in return, but whatever it was, it shut her up. Karen went into the car in silence, still in her robe and slippers, looking like someone had pulled the mask off the local villain and found nothing but fraud and fear underneath. That moment was electric. But the aftermath? That's where the real fireworks began. With Karen and Groves both in custody, the HOA board had no leadership. Within hours, a dozen residents gathered in my driveway. They were confused, angry, relieved, all at once. Mrs. Rosenbaum actually cried and hugged me. Mr. Reynolds, the ex-president, handed me a folder full of documents Karen had stolen from him. Turns out, Groves had been helping her doctor financial statements for over 2 years. They'd created phantom expenses, funneled funds into shell companies, and used those to justify the fines they were demanding. Some of that money even went to renovate Karen's house, including the new kitchen she bragged about during the last HOA cookout. We needed a forensic accountant, and fast. Jake, my cousin at the Attorney General's office, brought in a team that specialized in nonprofit fraud. They tore through the HOA's records and found a rabbit hole so deep we started calling it the HOA Mafia. Dozens of fake accounts, fraudulent vendor contracts, payments made to companies that didn't exist. And it wasn't just Karen and Groves. 2 more board members, Pam Jeffries and Clyde Dalton, were implicated within days. They'd been getting kickbacks for turning a blind eye, approving budgets with padded invoices, and silencing whistleblowers. Pam even had her nephew set up a landscaping company that billed the HOA $5,000 a month to mow 6 lawns. With the board in disarray, residents were finally speaking out without fear. And the stories were worse than I imagined. One veteran couple had been threatened with foreclosure over a supposed fence code violation. A single father was forced to pay thousands in made-up noise citations or risk losing custody during his divorce. It wasn't a community anymore. It was a hostage situation. I started organizing nightly meetings on my back patio. We called them Freedom Nights. Everyone brought something. Wine brownies, old HOA letters they'd saved in shoeboxes. We laughed. We cried. We built something we hadn't had in years, trust. But even as things began to shift, a new twist hit us square in the face. Karen was out on bail. She wasn't allowed near the HOA office or to contact residents directly, but that didn't stop her from trying. One of my friends, Alex, got a message on Instagram from a burner account. Another neighbor found a handwritten note on their windshield. "You're being lied to. Tyler is manipulating you." I wasn't surprised. Karen was many things: arrogant, cruel, manipulative. But above all, she was relentless. I met with Officer Preston again. If she violates her release order, Can we act fast? Absolutely. Just document everything. One solid violation, and the DA will revoke her bond. So we did. I set up a team of volunteers, literally just neighbors with cameras and some spare time. We called ourselves the Watchdogs. And it wasn't long before we caught Karen on a video call with Clyde Dalton, right from her porch. That was strike one. Then she was seen in the HOA storage unit at the clubhouse. That was strike two. Strike three came when she tried to file a fake violation notice against me again. This time, though, the paper trail led straight to her new fake company, HOA Solutions LLC. And the address? Her daughter's condo 2 towns over. She was running a ghost HOA while out on bail. We handed it all to the DA. And this time, they didn't just revoke her bond. They added 2 more felony charges to her record. While Karen sat behind bars awaiting trial, the rest of us began rebuilding. But just when things seemed to finally calm down, I got an anonymous letter, typed, "No return address." Inside, a single sentence. "You may have stopped her, but you didn't stop us." I read it twice. Then I scanned it for fingerprints. Nothing. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. I wasn't afraid, but I knew this wasn't over yet. I held the letter up to the light again. Nothing. No watermark. No imprint. Just that one sentence printed in stark black ink. "You may have stopped her, but you didn't stop us." My gut told me it wasn't just a scare tactic. It was a warning. Whoever else was involved hadn't surfaced yet, and now they were watching me. Not just Karen's cronies either. This was something else. Something bigger. I met with Preston again that evening. I handed him the envelope inside a Ziploc bag. Typed, "No return address. Delivered by hand. No postmark." He scanned the note and said, "Someone's nervous, but bold enough to threaten you directly." That same night, Mrs. Vargas called me in a panic. She'd found a small black device under her porch light. A camera. It was transmitting somewhere, likely to someone who didn't want her talking. Preston came out immediately and confirmed it was active. We swept 3 more homes and found 2 more hidden cameras. One at the edge of Reynolds' garden, another inside Alex's shed. Someone had bugged multiple houses to keep tabs on residents. That changed everything. This wasn't just leftover Karen drama. This was organized surveillance. Covert. Professional. Jake, my cousin at the AG's office, pulled me aside and quietly asked if I'd ever heard of a company called Civic Guard. I hadn't. He explained it was a shady private contractor used by some HOA management groups, sold as neighborhood monitoring solutions, but with a dark history. They'd been sued in 2 states for illegal surveillance and privacy violations. Karen's shell company had filed for monitoring services under Civic Guard's name 6 months earlier. It explained everything. The fake fines, the personal blackmail, the perfect timing of violation notices. They were using a real surveillance grid to watch homeowners, then twisting that information into threats. I pulled the HOA's old contracts and noticed something strange. A routine landscaping invoice listed a separate line item. Security maintenance, $900 per month. It had been buried in the budget for over a year, and nobody ever questioned it. That's how Civic Guard got in. Someone was still paying them. But with Karen behind bars, who? It had to be someone still on the inside, or someone recently replaced. I cross-checked dates with HOA treasurer reports, then circled one name, Linda Cho, the acting vice president. She'd always seemed timid, always stayed behind the scenes. But she'd approved every Civic Guard invoice for the past 6 months. Quiet, careful, unnoticed. The perfect cover. I confronted her at her doorstep. At first, she played dumb. Claimed she didn't recognize the company. Said she was just signing off what Groves used to approve. But when I mentioned the cameras and said Preston had a warrant ready to search her property, her face changed. She stepped back, stammered something about needing to make a call, and tried to close the door. I stopped it with my foot. She froze. "I wasn't the one blackmailing people," she said quickly. "I just signed off to keep my seat." I asked her who was giving the orders. She hesitated. "I've never met them. Just emails. Instructions. Payments wired from a firm in Nevada. I thought it was HOA tech, like Smart Security." I asked for the emails. the metadata, IPs, anything. Linda agreed to cooperate if we kept her out of the papers. She handed over a drive with months of correspondence. It confirmed everything. Karen was just a face. Someone else had built the system, paid for it, operated it, all from behind a proxy account labeled Admin Ghost. Preston's team went to work tracing it. We expected a dead end, but what they found stunned everyone. Admin Ghost traced back to a man named Richard Neves, a name no one recognized. But his LLC? That one rang bells. Southwest HOA Management Group, the same corporate entity that handled over a dozen HOA communities in our state. And Karen's HOA. It was just one of them. This wasn't about a single neighborhood anymore. We had stumbled into something far larger, an industrial-scale scam hiding behind community enforcement. I sat in Preston's office while they ran financials. Richard Neves had set up over 50 companies in 3 years. Security tech firms, vendor suppliers, landscaping outfits, all fake, all funneling money back into his accounts, using HOA boards like Karen and Groves to rubber stamp contracts and launder funds. It was a machine. Karen was a cog, and we had just jammed a wrench into it. Richard Neves wasn't just laundering HOA money. He was building an empire off the backs of terrified homeowners. Preston's team pulled his last 5 years of financials and discovered wire transfers from nearly 20 different neighborhoods across 4 states. Some payments were tiny, just a few hundred a month. Others, tens of thousands, hidden under project codes like infrastructure upgrades or urban beautification. And he was careful. No 2 HOAs had the same vendor names. Each fake company had different logos, slightly different addresses, and different shell websites. But the back-end banking? It all funneled into the same 2 Cayman Islands accounts. This wasn't just fraud. It was racketeering. Jake called in a contact from the FBI's white-collar crime division. Within 48 hours, they opened a case file and quietly began collecting evidence. The trick now was to make sure no one tipped Neves off. If he caught wind of what we were doing, he'd vanish. This guy wasn't some fool in khakis with a clipboard. He was running a criminal syndicate disguised as community service. We needed more proof. So I volunteered. Using a burner email and a fake HOA name, I posed as a board president looking for new monitoring and enforcement vendors. Within a week, I got a response from one of Neves' companies, CivicStat Solutions. The name was different, but the language was the same. We offer end-to-end security, surveillance, compliance enforcement, and collection services for HOAs with stubborn residents. Stubborn residents. That said it all. We arranged a Zoom call. I recorded every second. Neves didn't appear himself, but a man named David gave the pitch. Slick, confident, and alarmingly casual about privacy. Our tech allows you to monitor problem members, document their violations, and, let's say, apply corrective pressure. Most people fall in line within a week or 2. He was selling fear as a subscription. At the end of the call, he sent a PDF contract, complete with onboarding instructions. And on the last page, a billing contact, Neves and Harlan Associates. We had him. But the challenge now wasn't just exposing him. It was protecting our town. Because the moment Neves realized someone was pushing back, things started happening. Alex's tires got slashed. Preston's cruiser was tagged with rat in red spray paint. Someone put a dead possum in my mailbox. Linda found her brakes cut. This was war. We couldn't trust anyone from the HOA's old network, so we created a small task force with Preston, Jake, Linda, and 3 homeowners we knew were clean. We held secret meetings at the back of an abandoned cafe 2 towns over. Phones off, windows covered. Preston called it the firewall. We gathered all the documentation, contracts, bank statements, shell company registrations, emails from David, surveillance footage from the hidden cameras, everything. Once the FBI had it all, they moved quickly. A federal judge signed off on warrants for Neves, Groves, Pam Jeffries, Clyde Dalton, and David, aka Marcus Renner, an ex-security contractor with a sealed history. They moved in one morning at 5:03 a.m. The FBI hit 5 addresses at once: Neves' office, his vendors, his condo in Scottsdale, and 2 server farms he leased space in. By 9 a.m., Neves was in custody. And guess what? He went quiet, refused to speak, lawyered up instantly. But his tech guy, Marcus, cracked in 48 hours, gave them everything, including the list of neighborhoods across the country that had been infected with their system. The feds called it Operation False Fence. We watched it unfold from the sidelines, like a Netflix series come to life. One by one, news outlets picked it up. Nationwide HOA scam busted. Surveillance and blackmail ring uncovered in local communities. Karen's mugshot was plastered all over the morning news. But none of that prepared us for what came next, because one of the agents told Jake something we weren't supposed to hear. They found another list, a red file labeled Clients, Tier 2, Black Contract. It wasn't about HOAs. It was a collection of names, judges, real estate brokers, developers, people with power, people Karen knew by name. That's when we realized Neves had help at the state level. We were no longer just witnesses in a fraud case. We were enemies of a machine that still had money, influence, and loyal allies in places we couldn't yet see. The next day, my power got cut off without warning. City inspector showed up with the stop work order for my fence from 3 years ago. Someone hacked my water bill account and reported me as a commercial user. I wasn't just being watched now. I was being squeezed. Jake told me to keep my head low, but I couldn't. People were still scared, and now they were being retaliated against. We had taken down one layer, but Neves' empire had roots. So I started digging again. And that's when I found the key piece, an HOA manual sent to all their preferred board presidents under the original Neves umbrella. It was titled, Control Through Compliance, Behavioral Reinforcement in Community Management. It was a blueprint for coercion, fines, surveillance, personal data mining, and even suggested phrases to use when delivering threats masked as friendly warnings. And the first line read, Fear is the greatest tool for order. I read that line over and over. Fear is the greatest tool for order. That sentence made my stomach turn. This wasn't about fines or fences anymore. It was psychological warfare. Every HOA president in Neves' network had been trained to use fear, guilt, shame, and pressure like weapons. They'd been handed a manual on how to control people while looking like protectors of the neighborhood. The training document was full of carefully worded manipulation tactics. Always reference community values. Blame the resident for creating unrest. Document everything, even if you plan to delete it. It even had a chart showing how long the average resident could be pushed before they fought back, and how to isolate them when they did. I printed a copy and gave it to Preston. His jaw tightened as he flipped through it. This is worse than a scam, he muttered. This is systemic abuse wrapped in patriotism. By the end of the week, we confirmed 3 other HOAs in our region were still under Neves' influence. One had already installed identical hidden cameras. Another was mid-process of hiring CivicStat for a compliance upgrade. I felt sick thinking how many families were being watched, manipulated, and fined into silence while believing they had no choice. I couldn't sleep, so I started calling those neighborhoods. I didn't give them my name. Just asked if anyone had ever received fines that seemed personal. Noticed strange cars parked nearby. Neighbors who suddenly stopped talking. Half of them said yes. One woman told me her 11-year-old son was cited for bicycle loitering. Another said she was fined for a flower box the HOA said was too emotional in color tone. It wasn't random. These people were being monitored, analyzed, judged, and punished. I knew we needed more than just evidence. We needed the public. So I sent everything, manuals, footage, screenshots, to a journalist I trusted in Sacramento. A real bulldog. Within 48 hours, she called me back. I'm in, she said. This is going to explode. But someone else knew we were getting close. Because that night, Linda's house was broken into. They didn't take anything. They just moved everything around. All the photos turned backward. Her coffee table flipped. A single word scrawled on the bathroom mirror in red lipstick. Silence. She didn't call the police. She called me. I got there 10 minutes later. She was shaking, holding a baseball bat, barefoot in her driveway. That was the last straw. We moved her to a safe location the next day, and Preston assigned 2 unmarked patrols to rotate near her property until further notice. The journalist, meanwhile, was working fast. Her report would air on a Monday. She promised us that. Said she was going to lead with footage of Karen demanding compliance donations during a board meeting. But on Sunday night, her station's servers crashed. Everything went black. No backups. No access. Just a blank screen and a message that read, "Undermining order has consequences." That's when I realized Neves wasn't just connected. He had cyber muscle. Jake told me later that one of the FBI's forensic techs traced the attack to a data center owned by a subsidiary of one of Neves' shell firms. And that shell firm, it had an active federal grant for neighborhood development technology. This monster was using government money to terrorize civilians. But the journalist wasn't done. She didn't care about servers. She took the entire story and printed it in a physical Sunday insert. Every subscriber in the city got a full-color exposé with Karen's mugshot on page 1 and the headline, "The Compliance Cartel: How HOA Fear Tactics Became Big Business." By Monday, our phones were ringing nonstop. State senators, investigators, other victims. Then came the one I wasn't ready for. Karen herself. She called from county jail, smug and too calm. "You think you stopped something," she said, "but Neves isn't the boss, and you just made yourself a target." I didn't speak. I just let the silence do the talking. But in that pause, I realized she was right. We had cut the head off one snake. But this wasn't a snake. It was a hydra. And we just lit the fire that would draw every other head out of the shadows. I hung up on Karen without saying a word, but her voice stuck in my ears like static. Neves isn't the boss. That one sentence unraveled everything we thought we'd accomplished. We hadn't exposed the whole system. We'd just pierced the first layer. The feds were moving slower now. Not because they didn't believe us, but because every new lead pointed higher up. State databases with altered codes. Permits that didn't match their registrations. Even signatures from elected officials who were now unavailable for comment. Jake got the green light to build a broader joint task force, pulling from federal agents, state cybercrime units, and even the IRS. That's how serious it had become. They stopped calling it a fraud investigation. They started calling it a domestic corruption operation. But while the agencies played chess with paper trails and warrants, the retaliation escalated. Someone hacked Linda's bank accounts again, this time routing money out in small pieces to random nonprofits. Alex received an anonymous email with GPS coordinates to where his teenage daughter's school bus parks after drop-off. I got a letter. No return address. Just a photo of me standing in my backyard, taken at night. It wasn't grainy. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Preston installed motion lights, surveillance cameras, and even left a cruiser parked near my house every other night. But we all knew it wouldn't stop them if they wanted to make a move. This wasn't just Karen or Neves anymore. This was something entrenched. We needed to break through again, make them flinch. And that meant leaking the one thing we hadn't yet, the payments. Every dollar Neves took was documented in a digital ledger Jake recovered off a compromised CivicStat server. Not just amounts, but names. HOA board members, property managers, even a few code enforcement officers. It was a who's who of suburban crime. So we gave it to the press. But not through one outlet. We sent it to 10. Independent journalists, watchdog blogs, HOA watchdog forums, even a Reddit AMA. The ledger went live at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 8:15, it had 300,000 views. By noon, it hit 1 million. The headlines changed overnight. Is your neighborhood part of the compliance cartel? Blackmail through fines? New evidence exposes HOA payout network. And right beneath those headlines were the names of hundreds of HOA officials caught red-handed. It was beautiful chaos. But with the attention came panic. HOA boards began holding emergency meetings. Some tried to delete evidence. Others resigned outright. Karen's old inner circle in our town? 3 of them disappeared completely. Cars gone. Houses vacant. Phones off. The fear was working, but not just for them. For us, too. That week, Jake found a tracking device under his car. Linda spotted the same black SUV parked outside her new safe house 2 nights in a row. Preston's cruiser got egged while he was parked at the station. Someone was watching, so we went public again, this time with voices. Jake and I appeared on a local podcast. We told the whole story. No filters. No redactions. We called out Neves. We named CivicStat. We even read a page from the HOA compliance manual on air. People were horrified. And more importantly, they were listening. That night, a man in his 60s knocked on my door. Said his name was Walter. He was part of a retired federal investigations team that used to look into real estate laundering operations in the early 2000s. And he'd been watching us for weeks. "You're close," he said, "but you still don't see the whole board." He handed me a flash drive. No label. Just one file. Property control that docs it wasn't just about HOA power or money. It was about land. Walter claimed this entire operation, CivicStat, Neves, even Karen's blackmail schemes, was a distraction. The real goal: forcing homeowners into foreclosure or surrender by drowning them in fabricated fines, and then scooping up their properties dirt cheap through shell buyers. I asked why. Walter didn't blink. Because whoever owns the land owns the future. Jake and I stayed up all night reading that file. It listed over 400 properties across 6 states, all tied to HOA seizures followed by purchases from obscure LLCs with zero digital footprint. Walter had cross-checked the chain of ownership. In 92% of cases, it ended at a holding company based in Delaware, registered under a name we hadn't heard before, Reclaim Growth Initiative. But Walter had. He pulled a folder from his satchel. Inside were FOIA requests, grant reports, and contracts. Documents showing Reclaim was one of the top recipients of federal redevelopment funds for suburban renewal. Millions of dollars, all funneled through HOA seizures. And now we knew exactly what they were after. It wasn't just about controlling the neighborhoods. They were flipping entire towns, one foreclosure at a time. Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the web of documents on the corkboard we'd pinned together. HOA names, fines, property foreclosures, transfers to LLCs, grants to Reclaim Growth, CivicStat contracts, everything connected like veins pulsing toward one heart. And at the center, no public CEO, no spokesperson, just a faceless initiative. Walter pointed to a stack of scanned forms. These aren't just seizures, they're pre-planned. I picked one at random, a neighborhood in Arizona. Every resident fined into compliance within 6 months. 3 declared bankrupt by month 7, and their homes sold to an LLC 2 weeks later. The kicker? The HOA board president from that neighborhood also appeared on the CivicStat training team. It wasn't just corruption. It was a syndicate. We had proof. Walter had enough to blow it wide open. But he warned us. Go public too soon, and they'll disappear everything. You get one shot. We needed to corner the head. Whoever was pulling strings above Neves. Karen had dropped that line about Neves not being the boss. So who was? Preston used his badge to run background checks on every executive, consultant, and shell buyer connected to Reclaim Growth. One name popped up again and again, always as a consultant or advisor. Always paid in non-traceable crypto contracts. A man named Elias Rowe. No photos online. No official job title. But a handful of flight records, always near the same cities CivicStat launched in. According to Walter, Rowe was ex-military intelligence who went private in the early 2010s and specialized in urban acquisition models. If that sounds vague, it was designed that way. Rowe was a ghost. But ghosts leave footprints if they're cocky. And Rowe was arrogant enough to have a private compound registered under one of his older aliases in Wyoming. That's where Walter had followed him 10 years ago, before being warned off by people above his clearance. So naturally, we went there. The plan wasn't to confront him, just confirm. Jake and I drove out together, pretending we were tourists. The land was massive. One narrow road led to a steel gate with blacked-out cameras and 2 signs that read Private Agricultural Research, no trespassing. We parked a mile out and used binoculars from a ridge. We saw a helipad, solar arrays, 6 SUVs with tinted windows, and armed private security. Not your rent-a-cop types. These were tactical, military-trained. Everything screamed off-books government. And standing by one of the vehicles was Neves. Still in the picture. Still reporting to someone. We caught it all on film. Walter told us it was enough. More than enough. But we didn't want enough. We wanted the whole thing torn down. So we pulled back and called a friend of Preston's, someone in Homeland Security. He agreed to meet. Off record. That meeting changed everything. Homeland had been watching reclaimed growth for over a year, but couldn't get inside. Every informant went dark or ghosted. One agent disappeared entirely. But now we had a breach point in Neves. Karen was in jail, but still clinging to her silence. If we could offer her a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony, we might get her to flip on Rowe and Neves. Preston made the offer. Karen refused. She just smiled and said, "I'll be out by Christmas. And you won't be able to afford your lawn by then." But 2 days later, she slipped. In a monitored call with her lawyer, she accidentally mentioned signs off on all CivicStat expansions. The initials were enough. Rowe wasn't just involved, he was commanding the expansion. Jake and Walter moved fast, pulling a sting on 2 HOA officials in Nevada who had been quietly planning a fake flood zone claim to evict residents. The operation intercepted emails from Neves with direct links to reclaim growth financial accounts. Homeland got the warrants. Raid started in 4 states simultaneously. Karen, she didn't get her Christmas. She got solitary confinement when a USB was found in her cell containing CivicStat proprietary code, proof she was still actively helping Rowe from jail. Neves ran, but Walter had already tracked his safe house. He was picked up at the Canadian border with 7 fake IDs, $150,000 in cash, and a burner phone containing only 3 contacts. One of them was Elias Rowe. Neves was caught, but Rowe wasn't even sweating. According to surveillance reports, he hadn't moved from his compound. No increased activity, no panic flights. It was like he wanted Neves to fall. Like he had planned for it. Jay kept saying the same thing over and over. He's shitting pawns. Preston pulled data off Neves' burner phone. There was one final outgoing call. It lasted 28 seconds. No audio recovered. But we traced the location. A private satellite uplink built into a research facility in Wyoming, Rose Base. Homeland began drafting a direct warrant. But every time they pushed, someone pushed back. Legal red tape. High-level denials. One judge recused himself, without explanation. We were hitting an invisible firewall. That's when Walter laid out the real theory. Rowe wasn't just running blackmail and land grabs. He was building strategic suburban strongholds. Every CivicStat neighborhood was designed around a blueprint: surveillance zones, choke points, exit locks, and infrastructure control. Water valves, power hubs, emergency road access. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. If something went wrong on a national scale, like a blackout, economic collapse, or civil unrest, Rowe's neighborhoods would be the fallback zones. Secure, compliant, pre-cleared of problem owners. Karen's blackmail was never the real operation. It was recruitment by intimidation. The ones who refused were pushed out. The ones who folded were documented. The goal: create a map of reliable civilian obedience pockets. And our town had been one of the first. Walter gave Homeland his original notes from 2013, when he tried to expose the same operation and got buried. That evidence, paired with the burner data and Neves' emails, finally broke the seal. A warrant was issued for Rowe. But when Homeland arrived at the compound, it was empty. No staff, no guards, no files. The vehicles were gone, the solar banks shut down, the helipad stripped of all markings. The compound wasn't evacuated, it was reset. They found only one thing inside: a photo of our team. Me, Jake, Preston, Walter, Linda, and Alex. Taken from a surveillance drone, marked with a date, 2 weeks earlier. And underneath it, handwritten in black ink: still playing checkers. Jake went white. Preston loaded his service weapon and didn't say a word. Walter just stared out the window, like he had already lived this once before. We realized something then. Roe didn't run because he was scared. He ran because the board changed. The next day, Alex got served with a $90,000 fine from his new HOA. The complaint? Undermining community trust through slander and subversive behavior. Attached was a copy of the podcast transcript we recorded 2 weeks earlier. Jake's parents in Texas were notified their house no longer met architectural compliance. The appeal deadline had already passed, even though they never received the original violation. Linda's fence was slashed. A dead rabbit was found near her front door, no footprints in the dirt. And I came home to find my garage door wide open, all the lights on, and my laptop gone. No signs of forced entry. Just a sticky note on my desk. You'll own nothing, and you'll beg to stay. Preston pushed for enhanced protection. Homeland relocated Walter to a secure site. But we knew this wasn't over. It had only evolved. The fines and threats weren't just retaliation. They were tests. Roe was probing weaknesses, looking for the pressure points that would make each of us fold. Instead of hiding, we responded. Jake set up a secure server and uploaded everything, files, emails, photos, surveillance, financial records, to an encrypted leak hub. We called it Project Easement. Within 48 hours, 3 whistleblowers reached out anonymously, 2 former civic stat auditors, and 1 ex-HOA enforcer. All 3 confirmed the existence of behavioral score sheets used to target and grade residents. If your score was too low, you got fined, harassed, or bled dry until you left. If it was high, you were labeled a preferred resident. 2 of those whistleblowers went silent the next day. The third called back with 1 sentence before disconnecting. They're moving to phase 2. Walter didn't even flinch when we told him about the warning. He just sighed like it confirmed something he'd feared for years. Phase 2, he said quietly, is when they stop buying influence and start deleting resistance. We had no idea what that meant until the very next morning. Jake's car exploded, not in a movie-style fireball, but a controlled ignition that took out the front half of his driveway and set his hedges on fire. If he hadn't slept in late, he would have been inside when it happened. No one saw who planted it. No security camera footage. No witnesses. Local police claimed it was a mechanical failure. Homeland swept in fast, took Jake and his family into protective custody. That was the last time I saw him in person. The rest of us stayed quiet, but Walter was convinced this was Roe cleaning the board before making his next move. So we turned to the one person who might still hold leverage against him. Karen. She was still in solitary. Homeland had her under sealed indictment, but she hadn't cracked. We requested an emergency hearing, an unofficial visit under the guise of a lawyer conference. They let me and Walter in. Preston waited outside. Karen looked awful, pale, nervous. Her eyes darted around like even the air was watching her. I slid a photo across the table. Our group, the one Roe had printed. Her eyes widened just slightly. Roe sent that, I said. He's cleaning house. You think he's going to spare you? She stayed silent. Walter leaned in. They've moved past blackmail. You're not useful anymore. You're a liability. She bit her lip. I don't know where he is. No one does. But you know what he's planning, I said. Karen looked at the guard, then back at us. She whispered, the new initiative. It's not land anymore, it's data. Walter froze. They're switching from property to behavioral compliance, she continued. Every HOA is being given upgraded software. It's going to start flagging people automatically. Not just homeowners, anyone who visits. Friends, delivery guys, Uber drivers. Walter looked sick. Automated threat ranking? Karen nodded. If your score drops too low, the system starts manipulating outcomes. Tickets, surveillance, fines, even criminal suspicion. I asked her how soon. She said, it already started in 3 cities. If you're not gone before the system flags you, your name gets marked. They call it soft deletion. You just start disappearing. Walter stood up immediately. We're done. We left that prison with one goal. Find the pilot cities and leak everything before the next step could go live. That night, we started cross-referencing city surveillance upgrades, civic stat contracts, and spikes in code enforcement cases. It didn't take long. 3 cities lined up perfectly: Fairgrove, KY, Moss Point, NM, and our own Brooksfield, WY. We'd been the test site the entire time. I called Alex, told him to pack, take his family, leave the state. He was already gone. Said he saw a drone hovering outside his daughter's window the night before. Not a store-bought model. Tactical. Silent. Unmarked. Linda's mailbox was stuffed with fake code violations. She sent me photos. One had the word escalated stamped in red ink, along with a warning. Your behavioral profile is under review. Preston tried to get his superiors involved. The sheriff's department laughed at him. HOA disputes aren't a national emergency, they said, until Preston found out his own badge had been flagged in the system. The next morning, his cruiser wouldn't start. His city ID was locked out of dispatch. He wasn't fired, but he'd been digitally erased. Preston went off the grid. Only Walter and I remained visible, and that was on purpose. We needed bait. We set up a sting, bought a fake HOA domain, built a shell CivicStat dashboard, and created a honeypot database of fake violations and homeowner profiles. Then we seeded the link into a few low-level forums known to be crawling with HOA compliance trolls. It took 2 hours. We got pings from over a dozen IPs, all routed through CivicStat offices. One tried to inject tracking code. Another tried to reverse image search our dummy photos. But one was different. It downloaded the entire directory and pinged a secondary server in Germany. That server belonged to a dark web marketplace called The Ledger. Walter had mentioned it once, a pay-to-play data exchange for blackmail material, behavioral profiles, and location tracking files on non-compliant individuals. It had been dormant for years. Now it was back online. And inside that server, we found something horrifying. Our names, our faces, our friends, relatives, neighbors. Each file had a threat rating, a behavior index, and a final column labeled Suggested Resolution. Mine said, Discredit, Isolate, Asset Seize, Walter said. Neutralize, and one name had no resolution listed at all, Elias Rowe, because he ran the platform. Walter said it out loud. This isn't just about one HOA, or Karen, or even Reclaim Growth. This is a pre-war behavioral kill list disguised as property management. And the world still had no idea. Our last card to play was Project Easement. Walter uploaded everything we had to the leak server and distributed the access keys to 3 journalists, 1 senator's aide, and a group of whistleblower watchdogs. We knew it wouldn't stop them, but it would expose them. And exposure meant panic. The next morning, every HOA in Brooksfield got an email from CivicStat support. It read, System failure. Access restricted. Rebooting, but it wasn't a failure. It was a purge. Files disappeared. Logs vanished. Anyone who tried to report violations got error messages. City code enforcers were reassigned. Karen was suddenly transferred to an undisclosed location. Walter's contact in Homeland, gone. And in that silence, something worse emerged. We received a new message on the Project Easement server. One line. You think the leak was your win. It was ours. And attached was a new list. More names. More photos. Ours were now marked. Phase 3. Walter didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. We had tried to play chess against an AI that wasn't just predicting our moves. It was designing the board while we played. The leak, the files, the exposure. It had been a pressure valve. They wanted us to think we'd won. Because when the public sees a scandal break, they assume the worst is over. But what if the real plan starts after the outrage? We checked our burner phones every few minutes. Nothing. No updates. No follow-ups from journalists, whistleblowers. Not even the watchdogs we'd armed with our documents. Everyone had gone dark, or had been silenced. Around 4 a.m., Walter said one thing. There's only one place left we haven't looked. He meant CivicStat's physical archive facility, one they swore had been decommissioned 2 years ago. It was a cold, brutalist building just outside state lines, surrounded by fencing and unmarked utility trucks. Supposedly empty. But Walter didn't believe in coincidences anymore. We drove 6 hours straight, Pulled up at the edge of the property before sunrise. The gate was open. That wasn't a good sign. Inside, the lights were on. Computers were humming. The server banks were glowing. And one desk had a fresh cup of coffee still steaming. They knew we'd come. But we weren't there to play nice anymore. Walter plugged in a kill switch USB that Preston had built before disappearing. One designed to trigger a data dump and corruption loop in under 30 seconds. We didn't know what files we'd get, but we knew whatever we fried would be a blow they couldn't walk off. We hit the switch. The servers screamed like something alive was being torn apart. Lights flashed. Storage racks blinked red. We grabbed the hard drives we could reach and ran. By the time we got back to the car, the building was pitch black. No alarms. No retaliation. No helicopters. Just quiet. Too quiet. Back in Brooksfield, we laid low. Preston reappeared 3 days later with bruises and a limp. He never said where he'd been. Jake sent a single message through an encrypted relay. Off-grid. Stay hidden. Linda's house was sold by someone pretending to be her. Her family was gone in less than a day. But we had the drives. And what we found on them changed everything. There were lists, thousands of names across all 50 states. Notes about protests, Facebook comments, school board meetings, parking disputes, property upgrades. People who had nothing to do with HOA conflicts, but were being monitored. Because they were difficult. Because they said no. Because they didn't fold. And at the top of each file, a score. CivicStat wasn't an HOA management system. It was a behavioral control grid. HOA enforcement had just been the beta test. Now we had proof. We sent it out again, this time differently. Not to the press, not to lawyers. We sent it to the people whose names were on the list. And that's when it all caught fire. The leaks went viral. Thousands of videos, emails, TikToks, Reddit posts. Real people who had never even heard of reclaimed growth suddenly realized they'd been under a microscope for years. The Senate opened hearings. States froze HOA powers. Roe was officially labeled wanted for questioning in an international investigation. They couldn't stop the fire now. Karen was rearrested and flipped completely. Turns out she had backups too. Emails that directly connected Roe to Homeland contracts and a few politicians who had mysteriously resigned over the past year. Roe never surfaced again. But his network, it crumbled. Piece by piece, the house of cards collapsed. And we didn't just survive, we burned it down from the inside. So yeah, that's how Karen tried to blackmail half the neighborhood into silence, and ended up being the fuse that blew up a national surveillance conspiracy. Funny how the smallest spark sometimes lights the biggest fire. If you want to hear the full story with documents, surveillance clips, and exclusive footage of the moment we triggered the data drop, hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around. Because if there's one thing I've learned, Karen was never the problem. She was just the mask. And the monster underneath? It still thinks you're not watching.